How is Canada seen since Paris?
Well, we were so overwhelmingly celebrated in Paris, and I want to say that was genuine. I know there was skepticism at home in Canada that when Justin Trudeau said Canada is back, but I can tell you, having been invited by the government of Canada, all of us as federal party leaders, Tom Mulcair, me, and Ed Fast wasn't there as a leader, but he represented the Conservative Party. All of us were brought forward to sit with the National Chief Perry Bellegarde, to sit with Premier of British Columbia, Premier of Alberta, Premier of Ontario. There was quite an impressive gathering of Canada, not just the federal government there in the room. And as I left to make my way from the front, where we'd all been sitting to listen to Justin Trudeau's speech to COP, as I tried to make my way out of the room, because I was someone that a lot of the other delegates knew from previous meetings, I was stopped by people who were coming out from their delegation seats with tears running down their face to hug me, to say how wonderful it is that Canada's back. It was extraordinary. So it was a genuine feeling of Canada's back that was reinforced when our Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Catherine McKenna, was the first representative of any industrialized country to say that in the range of tech possibilities around the goal of Paris, Catherine McKenna was the first to say we should commit to 1.5. The expectation from people like James Hansen, former head of NASA's climate science in the U.S., James Hansen was very negative about the Paris Agreement discussions before they started, because he said they're not going to pick the target that we need, they're going to go at 2. Well, thanks to Canada, we didn't. We went to 1.5. So the attitude since then to Canada has been increasingly a sense of bewilderment. A report last week from the United Nations noted that while Canada talks a good game, the world is looking at us and not seeing a climate target that's consistent with the Paris Agreement. And in fact, there were one UN commentator who helped write the report said, while the U.S., of course, under Trump has said they're pulling out, the U.S. is showing reductions in emissions. Canada's not showing reductions in emissions, and we don't see the plan that would actually get us to where we need to go. So I think there'll be increasing global pressure. And of course, I sympathize with, to the extent that Justin Trudeau is trying to maintain civil, if not productive, relationship with the U.S. president. It's really important, and I don't think there's any question after the last G7 where Angela Merkel did not let the agenda be diverted by the U.S. government. They managed to say, no, all of us are staying committed to the Paris Agreement. So there's no question that the U.S. is totally isolated. Canada has a much more important role now in saying, we have to do more. We recognize we need to ratchet up. If that's the kind of language we hear from Canada at COP23, and of course, I said it started today, but Minister McKenna and most of us who are elected officials will be going for the second week. So I'm able to lay wreaths in my constituency on Remembrance Day and then leave for Bonn. It's going to be very significant, and the world will be watching to see if Canada steps up to indicate a willingness to have a tougher target in the near term.
Can Canada lean on its carbon pricing plan?
Our carbon pricing plan, yes. The question, can we lean on our carbon pricing plan? It's certainly an accomplishment domestically to have a national carbon price. We do, I say for myself as leader of the Green Party, and I certainly know many people who are in the climate movement, are waiting for the promised legislation to bring in the carbon price. But we're late on carbon pricing compared to many countries. Sweden brought in its carbon price in, I think it was 1995, it may have been 94, and it's now $200 a ton. Our carbon price will be brought in 2018 and will be $10 a ton, just to give you a sense of the relative carbon pricing schemes. Carbon pricing, although controversial within some quarters in Canada, has been called for years now by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the International Energy Agency. So it's not something that's seen as extraordinary. Globally, internationally, no one thinks that putting a price on carbon is a bold move. It's kind of the bottom line. Get rid of subsidies to fossil fuels and put a price on carbon. These are essentially moves to correct for market failure, because polluting the environment, polluting the atmosphere, dumping your waste in a shared atmosphere should not be free. And under our current economic model, the cost of labor isn't free, the cost of resources isn't free, the cost of energy isn't free, but the cost of dumping your pollution in the atmosphere, there's no tipping fee. There's no charge. So that's what a carbon price does. By itself, it won't get us to our Paris targets. We need the kind of full court press of all parts of government looking at everything they do to figure out what do we do. And of course, there's a huge role to be played by the private sector and corporations within Canada that are working to reduce their greenhouse gases. But it's really important for Canada we can talk about what we're doing domestically, but I guess my point is, Julie, nobody around the world is going to say, wow, they're putting in a carbon price, $10 a ton. Wow. No, it's going to be the minimum thing that's expected of us.
So if your goal, or you would like to see Canada ratchet up the targets and not use the Harper targets, why is the government using the Harper targets? What is stopping the government from ratcheting up the targets?
Nothing. I would say, though, that a number of, I call it the perfect storm of bad luck for those of us who are looking at climate science and distressed by it. We went, when you'll recall that the first comments that came from Minister McKenna about the Harper target were that was the floor, it was weak, we'd do better. And then the process of negotiating with the provinces was handed to her deputy minister. And I think you may have heard me say this before, the government of Canada overall at the level of our civil service after 10 years under Harper, they are not partisan. I'm not criticizing any individual member of the civil service, but the culture changed. Resources to environment departments like Fisheries and Oceans, like Environment, like Parks Canada Agency, like the work of Transport Canada in protecting our navigable waters, resources shrank. So the advice from the civil service, I would say that's one part of a really bad perfect storm on why our climate policies are as bad as they are right now. You did not get advice going to the minister that was either ambitious or creative. And I could say that about many departments, but in the case of Environment Canada on climate, there was no ambition. There was, I think, a fairly steady effort to beat her down and say, this is the best you can get. The Harper target's going to be hard to reach. So that's disappointing. And at the same time, I think a lot of the environmental groups and climate groups were so overjoyed that Stephen Harper wasn't prime minister anymore, that they kind of, not to criticize environmental groups, but whether they have a collective case of PTSD or whatever, they weren't prepared to go right in at Catherine McKenna and Justin Trudeau and say, right, your election platform was weak. You did not commit to a target. You need to go into Paris committing to a tougher target than the one Stephen Harper left behind that the rest of the world knows is the weakest target in the G7, and you can do much better. These two things meant that it was almost inevitable that through a process of being dragged down to lowest common denominator policies through a pan-Canadian framework exercise with all the provinces, the result was, I guess we can't do better than Stephen Harper's target. But it's going to become impossible to hold to that position when the IPCC comes in with their report later in 2018. They've now said it's going to come out in October. And there is no doubt in anyone's mind that the IPCC is going to say that we're not on track to 1.5 degrees Celsius globally. They're going to say that the Paris Accord is only meaningful if countries are prepared to ratchet up their target. And there will be, as well as the report of the IPCC, something called a facilitative dialogue, which has been renamed in Paris COP Fiji terms, and I'm not sure I know how to pronounce it. Let me see if I can find it. But anyway, there's going to be in 2018 what really is the only enforcement mechanism for the Paris Accord, which is group shaming and peer pressure, and that will also be taking place in 2018. So the reasons things went badly are not because we lack the tools or it would be impossible to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius, but it will be very difficult to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius without a very significant, more ambitious effort that, for instance, made it a priority to get all carbon out of electricity production in Canada. We have long-term goals to get coal out of electricity, but they don't fall due till 2030. And in the case of Alberta, they're going to replace dirty coal with dirty natural gas. It's less dirty than coal, but they're still going to get greenhouse gas emissions in the Alberta electricity sector that they could leapfrog right over if they went right to renewables. So we could, in policy buzzwords, decarbonize electricity faster And we could shift our vehicle fleets to more electric vehicles faster. We could shift for the farming community, for fishers. We could commit to biofuels faster, to run the tractors, to run the fishing boats. There's much we could do. And another big ticket item that I forgot to mention that Canada could take forward, because it's on the agenda for COP23, is what do we do about international aviation emissions and international emissions from shipping. Those are not covered in the Kyoto Protocol. They're not covered in Paris, although the Paris Accord says we have to do more. The most, I think, the boldest thing for Canada to do, and we wouldn't be the first government that had done it, under Nicolas Sarkozy, France advocated for this at least a decade ago, which is that we need to put a global tax on the carbon used in international flights and international shipping. And that could, again, assist in filling up that fund I mentioned earlier that we've pledged to have it ready by 2020, $100 billion a year to assist developing countries. It makes a lot of sense to say, and this is why they've never been in a negotiated agreement. No one could figure out in Kyoto in 97, if a plane takes off from Heathrow and it lands at JFK, who's responsible for the carbon? So the simplest way to handle that is to put a price on the carbon on shipping and aviation that's international. And at the time, Canada did not agree with France, and I think it was the Harper administration at the time when Nicolas Sarkozy said, let's put a global tax, a carbon tax on these fuels. But there was support from Germany. If Justin Trudeau were to decide that his signature achievement as chair of the G7 was to get this through, that would be a huge contribution, because global aviation and global shipping together, if it was a country, would be the 7th largest emitter of greenhouse gases as a nation, is what's currently not trapped in any of the agreements because it happens outside national borders. So there's a lot that could be done both at COP23, and also in the chairmanship of the G7, that where Prime Minister Trudeau will play a huge role in 2018 on the climate file. And the fact that they've picked that as one of their 3 themes for their G7 presidency is very encouraging. I don't know for sure, but I would be astonished if inside the Prime Minister's office and inside Catherine McKenna's office, they don't realize that the current target is completely inadequate and they have to ratchet up. Et aussi en français, je pense que dans le cadre d'équipe de le Premier ministre, de la ministre de l'Environnement et Changement climatique, Madame McKenna, je pense que tout le monde a réalisé que le cible fixé du Canada actuellement est insuffisant pour atteindre le but de l'accord de Paris. On doit faire plus et c'est vraiment urgent de le faire. Any other questions? I'm very grateful for the journalists who were able to come today for this briefing. It's been, COP23 is one of those things where people will start covering it once Minister McKenna goes. My hope is that in explaining the background, the work plan for this meeting, it will be more meaningful for you and easier to cover whatever occurs there. And I will be filing daily reports, video blogs, and so on from Bonn, but I will be very mindful that as a member of the delegation, I don't slam my own government when I'm at an international COP. I'm very careful to only put forward those things that I couldn't possibly have learned by being a member of the delegation. But it is valuable and much appreciated to be able to be part of the negotiations as they take place through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. Merci.